just as Lebanon and Israel finally reached a ceasefire. The situation in Idlib, the eye of the storm in northern Syria, suddenly changed at dawn on November 27 local time. The terrorist organization Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS entrenched in Idlib and its affiliated forces like the Islamic Party of Turkestan TIP suddenly launched a large-scale offensive campaign against Aleppo, an important city in northern Syria. The sudden fall of Aleppo, judging from the battle formation deployed by terrorist organizations such as HTS showed a battle posture of attacking on all fronts and pressing forward along the whole line, from the very beginning. Its main targets were divided into two directions. Firstly, it was to cross the conflict freeze line stipulated in 2020 to the east and directly attack Aleppo, the largest city in northern Syria and what could be called the Eye of Syria. Secondly, it was to head south along the M5 highway towards Sarachibi and another important town in Idlib province, Marat al-Numain. The code name for this operation was rather ridiculous, called resisting aggression according to HTS's own account. Since the ceasefire in 2020, there had been instances where the Syrian Arab Army and the forces of the Axis of Resistance crossed the Green Line and engaged in firefights. Therefore, the main purpose of HTS in launching this operation was to restore the Green Line. That is, what they called resisting invasion. As for how this resisting invasion managed to cross the Green Line and even penetrate deep into the Syrian army's battle area, ha ha ha. If you can't put up a fight, then I'll just rush in all at once. Unexpectedly, the Syrian government army's supposed inability to fight back turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I didn't pay much attention to the situation of the war in northern Syria on November 27th and 28th. After all, I used to check the news sources from there frequently before. There had been numerous exchanges of fire between the two sides. Today you fired a few shells and tomorrow I fired a few shots. But basically, it was just sporadic shooting from fixed positions. After the fighting, everyone would go back to their own places. I never expected that this time the fighting would escalate. On the 28th, the Syrian army launched several tactical counterattacks along the M5 highway and had a somewhat back-and-forth battle with HTS and TIP. However, the situation changed suddenly on the 29th. HTS seemed to have deployed some of its elite forces and used suicide vehicles to clear the way, launching a fierce offensive against Aleppo. By the end of the day on the 29th, the HTS commando units had broken through the Syrian army's defense lines on the western perimeter of Aleppo, and large numbers of DRG units rushed into the urban area of Aleppo. In just one day and one night, the entire western urban area of Aleppo fell into the hands of the enemy. HTS also reached several key locations in the urban area of Aleppo, such as the city hall, the old statue of Hafez el-Assad in the city center, and the ancient castle on the central highland of Aleppo. They took pictures everywhere, as if they were on a sightseeing tour. And the defense of the Syrian army almost collapsed. It was reported that the 18th Division of the Syrian army, which was stationed there, completely gave up resistance. Thousands of soldiers fled their positions, and a large number of heavy weapons were left to HTS. Among them were even heavy equipment like the T-90 and T-70 to M1 main battle tanks. On the night of the 29th, it was said that the leader of HTS, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, swaggered into Aleppo. Moreover, the administrative department and even the police department of HTS also moved into Aleppo one after another, while the Syrian army was nowhere to be found. There were rumors that the Syrian army had regrouped at the Aleppo International Airport located east of the city. However, there were also reports saying that there was no such regrouping at all. Generally speaking, the defense of the Syrian army in the direction of Aleppo had completely collapsed by this time. It is particularly worth mentioning that the Islamic Party of Turkestan TIP which served as an affiliated force of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS, was almost able to take on a major role on its own in this offensive campaign and was fully responsible for the offensive on the southwestern front of Idlib at present. These people rushed southward all the way along the M5 highway, and all the villages along the way fell into their hands. On the afternoon of November 30th, the organization proudly announced that they had captured Marad al-Numain. By the end of the day on November 30th, the organization announced again that they had taken Khan Sheikhan, which was just 36 kilometers north of Hama. HTS has already boasted that it will capture Hama and simultaneously declared that they had taken the entire Idlib province under their control. How to view the current battle situation? In my opinion, at present, almost all the disadvantages in the battle have gathered together. Firstly, up to now, it is impossible to figure out where the main defense line of the Syrian Arab army is. Is it in Idlib or Hama province? The Syrian government army has not formed any relatively solid defense. Secondly, up to now, it is impossible to locate where the intact blocking units of the Syrian Arab army are. All the counterattacks are sporadic and lack proper formation. Of course, under the circumstance that the main defense line cannot be found, it is quite normal for the counterattacks to be unorganized. But this also basically confirms that up to now, the Syrian army is still in a state of hastily responding to the battle and has far from forming a defense line during the retreat process. In addition, HTS's combat tactics this time were rather ingenious and its equipment was quite sophisticated, judging from the battle formation and tactical methods. Based on the current situation, HTS has inherited the tactical style of the traditional Syrian religious authority, organizations that are fearless of casualties and charge forward bravely. They used suicide trucks to clear the way and infantry units rushed forward en masse under fire in just 3 or 4 days. The number of terrorists killed exceeded 300, and the casualties might have exceeded 1,000. However, the manpower and resources available in the captured areas far outweighed their casualties. At the same time, they also adopted a large number of new tactics and methods. For example, HTS's channels have repeatedly released information that the organization used drones for battlefield reconnaissance and surveillance, and even used FPV drones to attack Syrian army armored vehicles and fortified strongholds. Later, there were also reports indicating that the Syrian army encountered electronic interference in the direction of Aleppo. Although this electronic interference might have been caused by someone else behind the scenes, it proved that HTS could think of using electromagnetic cover when organizing the offensive, which was already better than the regular armies of most Middle Eastern countries in terms of attack tactics. HTS, like the Ukrainian army, was accustomed to combining firepower warfare with cognitive warfare. After the first echelon broke through the Syrian government army's defense line, a large number of reconnaissance and destruction groups (DRG) were immediately dispatched. These check-in groups scurried around behind the Syrian army's defense line, taking pictures and posting them online, creating the illusion of a full-depth attack and sowing panic among the Syrian army. As a result, the frontline troops collapsed first, followed by the deep echelon troops. The units across the entire battle area fell apart like a snowball rolling down a hill. The performance of the Syrian Arab army was a complete mess, and it was unable to block the HTS units that were running around everywhere. I pessimistically estimate that it's going to be like the Damascus rally, a metaphor suggesting a chaotic and disastrous situation where the enemy advances rapidly towards Damascus. Although the situation might not be that bad, it's far from easy for the Syrian Arab army to stabilize its position. First of all, it must immediately stabilize the defense line. It seems that Hama can't hold out. Then the Rasta and Homs axis south of Hama is the area that the Syrian army must ensure to defend, especially Homs. Once Homs is lost, The M5 and M1 strategic highways that connect Damascus with the coastal cities of Tartus and Latakia in Syria will be completely cut off. The strategic connection between Damascus and the prosperous coastal areas will be completely interrupted, which would be an almost devastating blow. However, to ensure the defense of the Homs front, the Syrian army must first hold out in Hama. So far, the main reason why the Syrian army has been slow to establish any defense line is that HTS is advancing too fast. Every time, the Syrian army is unable to shift to defense in a hurry. The predetermined defense lines are broken through by HTS's reconnaissance and destruction groups before they can be set up. The continuous breakthroughs by HTS have also brought great chaos to the morale and command system of the Syrian army. Therefore, I think the key lies in how the defensive battles around Hama unfold. Even if HTS can be slightly delayed around Hama for a while, with HTS's ability to attack fortified positions, it will be quite difficult for them to continue moving south to Homs. But if the Syrian government army abandons Hama and lets HTS march south all the way, it's really hard to say what will happen. All in all, the few days from November 30th to around December 2nd are extremely crucial for the Syrian war situation. Just as I'm writing this, there's new news coming from Aleppo on the front line. The Russian aerospace forces have started large-scale airstrikes on Aleppo, and it's said that there are still some troops of the Syrian Army's special forces in Aleppo, who are currently designating targets for the Russian aerospace forces. If the Syrian government army can effectively regroup, it may not be able to retake Aleppo immediately, but at least it can check the momentum of HTS's continued advance. And the same goes for the Hama direction. All in all, the current situation is rather complicated. All we can say is that we should keep a close eye on it. All in all, regarding the current situation of the Syrian war, many influential figures have become pessimistic again. There are problems with both the situation and people's morale. I think we can just mention a few points. Firstly, the situation in the Middle East is changing rapidly at present. The roles played by Turkey and Israel, especially these two countries, are open to question. What we need to do is to grasp the key points among all these complexities and sort out the whole story clearly. Secondly, judging from the offensive campaign organized by HTS this time, HTS's regular combat capabilities have become highly sophisticated. It should be particularly noted that the Islamic Party of Turkestan TIP, which serves as an affiliated force of HTS and is responsible for the operations south of Idlib, has demonstrated superb tactical abilities and combat skills in the battle. This style of the reconnaissance and destruction groups DRG charging forward bravely couldn't have been intended and implemented by HTS on its own without the hands-on teaching of NATO or even Ukrainian instructors. Most importantly, these people are quite bold. If they are allowed to grow in power in the Middle East this time, the world will never have peace in the future.